Hello and welcome to the Fogel and Puttamianos webinar, Marketing in Crisis. I'm Jerome Fogel, your moderator. I'm a partner with Fogel and Puttamianos, and I have here an amazing panel, so I want to get right into it. And after I do some introductions, we'll have some really focused questions, and you will have an opportunity to ask questions in the audience. So get ready to ask questions around minute 30 to 45 in this panel. So first I want to introduce Denise Roberson. She is not only a professor at Pepperdine in marketing, but she is Chief Purpose Officer of TWA Chiat Day, which develops strategies for some of the world's most iconic brands. And her work includes groundbreaking research and thoughts on the role of corporate purpose as a core element of competitive strategy and building brand value. So welcome, Denise, to the panel. So glad to have you.
Thank you, Jerome. Excited to be here.
Yes, and I have down below on the left, I have Constantine Puttamianos. He is a corporate and M&A partner with Fogel and Puttamianos. He also served in Army Special Operations and has expertise in crisis management and currently advises startups and international companies in the area of strategy and legal. So Constantine, glad to have you here with us.
Thank you, sir.
And last but not least, David Herman. He is the president of Herman Digital. He's an expert on building authentic brands for direct-to-consumer brands. And he's worked with Costco, Gates Foundation. If you love the show, The Profit, which I love, Marcus Lemonis' company. So David, we're so glad to have you here with us.
Welcome. Yeah, great to be here.
Okay, so where I kind of want to start with this is we talked about, first off, we think we're in a crisis, I think, and we think we know what marketing is. I want to read a couple definitions that I got off of Oxford American Dictionary. Maybe we agree or disagree about these definitions. They said a crisis is a time of great danger, difficulty, or doubt when problems must be solved or important decisions must be made. So I feel like this qualifies what's going on in the world as a crisis. And then marketing, they defined as the activity of presenting, advertising, and selling a company's product or service in the best possible way. So that's a general, idea. But I want to go deep with each of our panelists because there's so much that they have to share with us. So I want to start with Denise, with you. So you've done groundbreaking research on corporate purpose, and I would love for you to share more about what this research is and how it relates to competitive strategy and building a brand. So, some in our audience may have heard of this before, some may be new to this. So would love for you to talk more about that.
Sure. So if we're going to look at definitions, let's look at a definition of purpose in the most general sense of the word. If we look at corporate purpose, it's really the reason for being beyond profits that guides a business growth and its impact on society. So it's a North Star. It's the soul of the company. It's its promise to not just customers or employees, but the entire stakeholder group. I think one of the interesting misconceptions is that a lot of people in the US in particular, they perceive purpose as philanthropy or environmentalism. But actually when purpose is done properly and authentically, it's a robust framework and it achieves business goals and it creates values. So there's like a lot of misconception around this notion of, all right, so we have this basic idea of purpose. A lot of people today still believe, and again, this is more of a US theory, that purpose is antagonistic to profits, but it could not be further from the truth. Purpose is actually deeply synergistic with profits and has a business case that's been measured extensively at this point. So if we look at all of the magazines and publications that have had purpose on the cover just in the last year, we've seen Gartner, HBR, Ernst & Young, Accenture, this huge statement from the Business Roundtable that was sort of the shot that rang around the world. And a few universal truths have actually emerged. And what I like about these is that they've been deeply and robustly measured at this point. So one of the statistics that I thought was a bit staggering is now 2 out of every 3 consumers deeply believe that it's a responsibility of business to take a leadership role in solving key issues facing society. 10 years ago, we wouldn't have been anywhere near a statistic like that. So we've got companies now, and the research is showing that we have companies that are practicing purpose that are seeing an increase in brand loyalty, customer trust, lifetime value, share of voice. And then we've got some executives that are utilizing purpose as sort of the lens by which they view everything. They're sharing with us that what they're seeing is purpose-led decisions help their company navigate in these turbulent environments. It improves things like risk and awareness and agility. And then on the employee front, we get better talent acquisition, productivity, empowerment, and a key metric I don't want to overlook is the trust metric. We've got a lot of trust problems. Edelman's Trust Barometer, I think just about every business executive has looked at, and employees are really struggling with trust these days. So interesting fact. So decades of research have shown that purpose-led brands are more likely to stay afloat during times of crisis. They're faster to recover. They've got strong competitive advantage and differentiation. And one of these interesting stats, and this is pre-crisis, I will absolutely put the disclaimer. When we looked at purpose-led brands versus traditional brands, the purpose-led brands outperformed in the S&P 500 by 400%. That's a pretty staggering statistic.
Wow.
So
Wow.
This business case is getting more robust by the day and has only been sort of set on fire by our two current crises that we're dealing with.
What's an example of maybe a business that made that shift, or that strikes out for you, that would be kind of an example of how to lead out in this? What would that look like?
I think one of the hallmarks to a company that's leading with purpose through this crisis is that they've changed their KPIs. They're looking at operating from a notion of solving, not selling. And that's a really key point in all of this. They recognize that people need help, so their focus is on bringing value. So we've seen companies like SAP. SAP opened their proprietary technology. They allowed people that were not part of the SAP network. They were able to get people in New York that were building temporary hospitals that desperately needed hospital beds, 500 of them to be exact. Someone that was not a part of this network was able to go on using this technology and found someone within mere hours. And they saved countless lives. We've got companies like Nike and New Balance and the automotive industry that have shifted their people and their manufacturing to make PPE. I mean, we saw Dyson and Tesla making ventilators. Like, some of these switches are pretty magnificent. And I think we've seen countless companies from various industries now deferring payments. And that's a really, really important trend because it helps people maintain essentials like shelter and health and transportation. I don't know if you guys have seen this notion of the inverted Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but it's really driving consumers today. We have that pyramid inverted at this point. So the list goes on and on. We have Louis Vuitton making hand sanitizer. Who knew you could have designer hand sanitizer? But when we look at purpose as a lens to provide true value and to help navigate through these difficult times, you'll see that those that are doing it, they make decisions faster. They're able to use this lens to authenticate the way they're operating and bringing value to the market. So it's about bringing value and not noise.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me because, and maybe David, you can speak to this. Are you in your work? Can you talk about a little bit about your work with brands, and maybe is there any connections between the types of brands that are building authentic value that have this type of purpose in them? Are you seeing that as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's coming down to the messaging and rethinking everything that we do. From a Q4 standpoint of sell, and then Q1, and it's like this year especially, we've had brands that we have the entire year rolled out, and March 18th we get on conference calls. We're like, we can't use any of this marketing for the rest of the year. And, we finally get sort of an understanding of, hey, this is what we're going to do. We're going to shift our messaging, right? And then instantly it's like this next, crisis hits. And it's like, okay, now is this out of touch? And it's just having a pulse for it and understanding that what is your why about even doing content or posting about stuff in marketing? Like what is the purpose of doing this? Because a lot of these companies are getting in trouble too at the same time. They're doing stuff that's just so tone deaf. Because this rush to get this message out, right? And if they're not thinking about it, it's better to be the last but be good than be the first to be bad, you know? And that's what we're kind of dealing with these days, I feel.
Can you give an example for those in our audience, or maybe, you know, they're leading a company or they're an executive or trusted advisor, of what kind of things your company does and how that ties into this kind of example of last to be good, but maybe first to be bad?
Yeah. So I do media buying mainly, focused on D2C brands. So that means anytime you see any ad across the entire internet, that's what I do. I strategize, I conceptualize the creative, find the audiences, and then run all of the ads and placements, and then take that data, go back and redo it again and again and again, right? And so that's what my KPIs are: sell. At the end of the day, that's what I'm supposed to do, is sell product. And it's I would say every day since March, it's been chaotic for everyone. And we manage 23 brands right now, managing between $1 million a month in spends down to, you know, $300,000 to $500,000 in spends. And, you know, every day it's, you know, just a new shock. Okay, what, you know, what's Facebook gonna do today? Or TikTok is now a spyware. Okay, everything. It's just like, you know, I was commenting earlier, I was like, I wish I could have one day, just one day of just chill, you know? So, yeah.
And, you know, speaking of, you know, crisis and chaos, David, so Constantine on our panel has, you know, been in Army Special Operations, and maybe Constantine, do you have some thoughts on, I mean, you've been in real, I mean, kinds of danger that we haven't faced as civilians, and maybe you could talk a little bit about your training and kind of how that applies to things nowadays, or kind of things you're advising clients now going through chaos and crisis.
Sure. There's a couple of things that are all points that were raised by Denise and David in turn that I think are relevant here. You know, one is purpose, and clearly having a strong team dynamic, and this varies with the organization and the size of the organization. But particularly for smaller companies, you know, that are trying to navigate this crisis, team dynamics plays a critical role. It plays a critical role in good times, but it also plays a critical role, especially in bad times. You got to have everybody kind of rowing in the same direction, and with a common purpose that they need to all be on board with. That's a critical aspect of it. And then secondly, to what David was saying, communication, I think, is absolutely critical, both in good times, but especially in bad times. And that communication goes across the organization, not only internally, but also externally, where I tell people many times that, you know, if you have what you think is bad news, share it. You know, the thing that nobody wants is silence, because we all know something is going on, you know, and we've all been in situations where we're not hearing from someone or some organization. And the immediate human instinct is to go to the negative, not to think, okay, everything's okay. We know, you know, we know XYZ is in the restaurant business. We know COVID is hit. We're not hearing anything from them, so everything must be okay. No, what we're thinking is, oh, geez, you know, we're not hearing anything. It's just getting worse and worse. So communication is critical. Now, with respect to how you respond, there's a military theory that you guys are probably familiar with or may not be familiar with, but it's called the OODA loop. And it was put together by a military strategist, Air Force Colonel John Boyd. And it was in the process of trying to figure out how dogfights operate, et cetera, and how to most effectively operate in them. And the OODA loop basically stands for observe, orient, decide, act. And it's this process that you have to go through on a constant basis. To what David was saying, okay, we have our plans for marketing. Guess what? Tomorrow, those plans have to change because the situation changed immediately. The organizations that can most quickly operate in that OODA loop most quickly observe the differences that are happening, orient to how they need to move on those things, decide that they're going to move in that direction, and then actually effectively implement that, are the ones that are, from a combat perspective, they're the ones that are going to be most successful, right? From a business perspective, while I don't necessarily relate it to combat, we do live in a chaotic world, and being able to effectively observe, orient, decide, and act is critical to survival in a crisis. And that also goes to what I was saying earlier, that ties back to communication, right? Because the communication that you put out is also going to solicit input from your various stakeholders. And you should be actively soliciting input from your stakeholders, because that'll give you additional input for your decision matrix, in my opinion. If you're talking to your salespeople internally and they're telling you what they're hearing from customers, if you're talking to other people in the industry and they tell you what they're seeing and what they're hearing, absorb all of that, try to absorb it quickly, and then reorient as necessary. Sorry, that might be a lot of information, and I hope it made some kind of coherent sense, but that's a little bit of the military perspective.
No, it makes a lot of sense because, businesses have to adapt. And so, I mean, in war is the most situation you have to adapt the most of anything, because it's unpredictable and chaotic. So I like that OODA kind of framework. Now when you're talking to, companies, whether it's startup or multinational companies, are you seeing like current marketing issues or communication issues that they're dealing with now? And are there certain things that you're seeing kind of repeat, that kind of advice that you're giving that you think would be helpful for our audience to know about?
The only thing that I can say is there's this tendency to kind of stay in a track that you're comfortable with. This is kind of a natural human tendency.
Mm-hmm.
The companies, though, that I'm seeing most successfully navigate this crisis are the ones willing to think outside the box and figure out not only how can they address the downsides posed by what the current environment is, but also start to think creatively about what the possible upsides are of this.
Mm-hmm.
How can we reorient to most effectively, meet our customer needs, meet society's needs, to what Denise was saying earlier. I would be interested in also hearing, what you were talking about, Denise, in terms of the shot that was hurled around the world. I know exactly what you're talking about, and you may want to add a little bit more flavor to that. But it's really interesting to hear that is actually resonating with consumers, and whether companies, particularly large companies, and let's exclude for the moment B companies that kind of have a societal purpose, how much they're kind of internalizing that, because you're probably in better touch with that than the rest of us.
I think it's interesting. I think what all four of us actually are identifying today is that the world is not going to change, it's changed. Yeah. So we've got, fundamentally, people are living differently, they're buying differently, they're thinking differently. And every company that I know is trying to accommodate that and adapt to that. One of the lenses by which they're viewing that is this notion of purpose. How do I bring value to what customers need today? So the Business Roundtable basically made a proclamation after a long-standing Milton Friedman run that it's all about bringing no longer profit just to shareholders, but to stakeholders. So this notion of stakeholder value, that we have to start looking at the entire stakeholder chain. And I think one of the things that purpose does is it allows us to accommodate some of these emerging trends. So a couple of them that I've been very keen on, that I've been talking to So Chiat works with a lot of large brands everywhere. TBWA works with Apple to Google to McDonald's to Intuit, the Grammys. So these are the conversations we're having daily. Is first, consumers now want to buy from companies that have values like theirs. That is a huge shift in consumer buying sentiment, and they're voting with their dollars. We saw this come up in millennials and Gen Z. We would expect it there, but now the trends are coming out to say this is happening against every major demographic segment. The second one is employees are now holding companies to a much higher standard. And we're starting to see large expressions of employee activism. So they're not going to go to work where they're in a dangerous situation. They're not going to blindly let consumers be placed in a dangerous situation. So we're seeing that the younger generation in particular, they're valuing things like value and purpose alignment higher than salary. Again, something we haven't seen. So if you're interested in recruiting top talent, that's got to be on your mind. And then the third thing is that Wall Street is now engaged. We are now seeing ESG and CSR be rewarded. People are interested in investing with companies that not only have a profit, but are trying in some way to do good in the world, whether that be social, environmental, or governance. They're choosing one of those verticals, maybe all of them. And it's an interesting way that companies are starting to show up now. So of course, we had the Business Roundtable, but we've also got people like Larry Fink, BlackRock's proclamation that if we don't shift to these needs, you're not going to have a business. So I think using this company purpose as an engine for growth and innovation, as well as a lens to evaluate your business actions, exactly what you were talking about earlier. How do we know what to say and when to say it? And I would say, don't create more noise. Don't say something just to say it. Reflect, take a step back. Make sure it's in alignment with the culture and the organization itself, and then find meaningful ways to add value to your customers. That, to me, if you live by only those words, you will have a large step forward.
I think that's right. I think that's right.
Yeah, that's exceptional. I think, when you're looking at how do we tie in values and purpose to kind of, you're saying things have already changed, not that they're going to change. And I think it's a cosmic shift. And what I hear from you is this is there's an opportunity now. I guess I would offer maybe to you, David, what kind of opportunities do you see now in this market? So we know things have changed. We have to look at purpose and values. So I guess what are the opportunities now that companies have, and even in a time of crisis like this?
I think that one of the biggest things is it's okay to talk about what's going on, and that you are seeing brands that historically have not talked about, if it's the diversity issue, if it's the, that kind of area, which has always been like, oh, well, let's not go there. Or, even with COVID and talking about and just taking a stand, you're seeing brands take a political stand on things. It's like really for some of these brands for the first time ever. And people are responding to it in mostly positive ways, from what I can tell. And, with what we do, because I'm kind of at the touch point, not only am I the one that's, coming up with these strategies, a lot of times I'm the one placing the ads on these platforms. I'm seeing the instant feedback. I'm seeing what happens. I have to go back and tell these companies, hey, for their venture-backed, their venture capital, folks and everything, like, hey, this wasn't well received. Why don't we try it this way? And there's always been like, I don't know, like, let's not go there. And it's like, no, I think you're seeing that now. It's okay, And the other interesting thing that a lot of this this pandemic especially changed was, for a lot of us, creative has drastically changed over this past few months. If you go look at a lot of assets, it's user-generated content being created as commercials for the first time. Like, you see Colgate now getting involved, and these big, like Unilever and Nike and Adidas, which that was never a thing, because that was like, no, we're the sophisticated brand. This is what we're doing. But what happened was suddenly none of these creatives can meet, and so they're having to shoot. Like, I have a studio at my house, and I'm seeing my ads going up, getting $1 million to spend, and it's been shot with my iPhone. And it's like, that's what we're doing, but that's what's it's creating a level of authenticity too, because it feels more personal when you do that. And like, we work with a pretty large shoe company. They sent me these assets on literally on March 18th. They paid all of this money for these like influencers to shoot this content. And I go, this is literally for shoes. Who's buying shoes right now? And I literally go, send me the pair of shoes. And my wife, I literally filmed her walking around in the house wearing the shoes. And I put the tagline on the shoes, and it said, you can still look good inside. and that ad just took off. And I was like, they're like, and everybody's like, these branding companies, they're just like, wait, you shot that on your iPhone and it worked? I'm like, yes, because that's what works now. And just being that way and being okay with it not looking good, being okay with the messaging not going through 20 rounds of revisions, just get one out there and be okay with it. And, as long, we're going to make mistakes. Everyone's making mistakes right now. And that's what I think is so interesting, is everybody is, and together. So.
Well, David, you literally just gave an example of accelerating that OODA loop, right? You're observing, you're orienting, you're deciding, you're acting, and you're compressing that OODA loop more and more, right? Yeah. Which gives you faster feedback and faster reaction to it.
Yep. And that's right. and that's the goal. I mean, the goal with this stuff now is test as many variables as you can, find what works that connects with your audience and go. And what we're seeing, especially in the D2C space, which is, the indie darling, which literally kept our country alive for the most part, based on what we've been seeing, is you saw Peloton, right? Peloton, they came out with this commercial in February and got just destroyed online for being tone deaf and all this stuff. Well, come March, what is everybody buying? A Peloton. And then you see the commercials coming out, and it's all like these like inspirational videos. And you're like, interesting. Like this, within 1 month, people realized they needed this product. They remembered them bashing it last month. They're like, oh wait, that was actually a pretty good ad, after the fact. But I bet their shareholders were not happy with the feedback. And I bet you they fired the creative team. But that's what you're seeing, just this quick. For the first time, it's no longer waiting 8 weeks for the, let's get the ratings back on this, or like, let's see what, the focus groups have to say about it. It's like the focus group was today. It was online, right in front of you, so yeah.
That gets me thinking too, because Constantine mentioned this OODA loop, and David, you're an expert on these social media platforms. Can you just share some maybe tips for our audience on how to use each platform? Because like I saw your Twitter, for instance, followers like blow up in like 3 or 4 months. And I'm like, I asked you, I said, what did you do? You're like, I just know how to use the platform, and so maybe you could talk about each platform and how businesses might use it, and maybe explain it a little bit.
Sure. I can start with like obviously the behemoths, Facebook, which is also Instagram. I like to always combine those two. The reality is with Facebook nowadays, the algorithm is organic is just, you're not going to get seen. The only way you can get seen on Facebook these days is either through a viral piece of content that goes crazy, which is about zeitgeist, whatever that may be, or a viral funny video. Those are really the only 2 ways that you're really going to get seen organically on the platform. Instagram, on the other hand, it's Instagram stories. Really it comes down to Instagram feed. The usage of Instagram feed has exponentially dropped because people are becoming lazier and lazier and lazier with scrolling. They no longer want to scroll. They want the platform to do it for you. So that's why Instagram stories usage is up. And, when it comes to Facebook and Instagram, you kind of know if you've been in this game, organic is dead. You have to do paid. Obviously Facebook's having it's quite the news going on right now. I've got literally, I count 9 reporters trying to hit me up because all they want to talk about is the Facebook boycott. And then I've got companies calling me like, what should we do? And it's like, that's a moment of crisis of going like, what should we do? And, Facebook is Facebook. That's all I say. You know what it is. The other, obviously Twitter. Twitter is my preferred social network. It's what I use the most. For Twitter, it's about finding your tribe, whatever that may be. I'm in the D2C Twitter space and digital advertising, which is somehow, some way this year just blew up. And I was a first mover on it. I've been talking on Twitter since 2008 and been there. And if you can just start owning it and communicating to people, the more you tweet, the better you get. That's at the end of the day, that's what I say. And just be communicative. Don't use hashtags. Hashtags are dead on all these platforms. No one uses them anymore. It's just not the place to go. But, really small, bite-sized quick tweets about whatever topic you're wanting to. A lot of times I include images that are optimized for the platform. And then there's the threads, obviously. So doing a Twitter thread about what you're passionate about, and that's a big deal. Obviously, Snapchat has really taken a big leap this year. Snap claims and prides themselves on being the one social network that does not have vanity metrics, which is a huge thing because, all this mental health is with the vanity metrics about being famous and all this stuff. Snap, from a user perspective, people think it's dead. Everyone's like, oh, no one uses Snapchat anymore. They do. It really is 13 to 15-year-olds that are using it, and they're communicating with, a lot of times, they're communicating with 40 plus. Grandparents are communicating with the grandkids through Snapchat, because a lot of parents are giving Snapchat to their kids as the first social network because it's deemed safe. Mm-hmm. Originally, Snapchat was not deemed safe. Now it is the safe one. Mm-hmm. And then obviously TikTok, which is the new one in the room. When you spend $1.5 billion on acquisition costs to get people on your app, it becomes pretty popular. TikTok, who knows if it's going to be around next week? I don't know. India banned it. Facebook, or the US might ban it too. But the platform, I don't know if any of you guys have been on it. It is the most addicting app you will be on because the algorithm is so good and it learns your behavior so quick. And that's what's scary about it. And from a content perspective, even TikTok says, don't make ads, make TikToks. And it's their whole thing is about using the app to make your content authentic enough for the app. Don't edit it off the platform, edit it on the platform and post whatever it is and joining the fray and, all that kind of fun jazz. So stuff.
No, I love it. I think it's just the idea of how to communicate in different ways is so important, and that people don't always know how to engage, or corporations may not know how to engage, because sometimes you see them and they're talking like it's 1995 or 2005 even, and I'm like, hey, wait, this is 2020, right? So, so I think it's cool that you gave that overview. I think it's super helpful. I guess the last question I have for all of you, and anyone can jump in, is, so I guess there's a quote that I like from Alfred P. Sloan. He was a CEO at GM, and he was the founder of the Sloan Institute for Management. And he basically said that the key to success in management is not adjusting to change, but anticipating change. And so I think we've talked a lot about purpose. We've talked about the OODA loop. We've talked about, authenticity and being last to say something really relevant and first to say something and kind of rush into it. So I guess for our audience, what would be some of the changes that you can anticipate are going to happen that they should be aware of when they're communicating, whether it's purpose or whether it's communication or marketing? What are your thoughts on what companies can anticipate in terms of changes coming?
Well, I shared the three of mine already, which was this look at how consumers are changing, how employees are changing, and how Wall Street is changing with its reward system. But I would say to any brand right now, the three most valuable attributes they can have and take to heart each day is flexibility, authenticity, and humility. Things are going to keep changing. It could be minute by minute. I had a great conversation with Nissan CMO. They spent an entire year building their campaign. And when COVID hit, It was all around sports. They had to redo it literally in one weekend. They had 48 hours to empower their people and get content pushed back
Wow.
out. So I think if people can realize, don't rush and add noise that will affect your brand unfavorably. Make sure you're being methodical about what you put out and be flexible with what's coming your way. Acting with authenticity will keep you safe because you're able to talk about the good and the bad, the challenges and the things you've overcome. And then this notion of humility. If something's gone wrong, tell people. If you're working on it, tell them how you're fixing it, but keep yourself honest to it. Hold yourself accountable and making sure there's some sort of measurement in place, because if not, those brands will definitely be penalized or punished by consumers that aren't willing to take false advertising or false promises or any of these things that feel hollow during these two crises at the moment. So I think living with flexibility, authenticity, and humility will help serve brands well.
Powerful. I love that. I'm writing a lot of notes, by the way. You guys are all amazing. Constantine or David, any thoughts on that last question?
To Denise's point, and as we've talked about before, I mean, my thing is communication, like over communication, and make sure it's two-way, right? I mean, a lot of companies think communication means we're going to push our message out, we're going to push our message out, we're going to push our message out. Well, you can get a ton of valuable data and feedback by encouraging communication inwards and actually sitting there and thinking about it and understanding it. And to your point, Jerome, in terms of anticipating future trends, well, look, none of us are prescient, but we can try to be. And if we listen to different voices that are coming in, we might get insights that we will not get in our own little insular loop. Whether we be a Fortune 500 or a 5-person company, we still have an insular loop that we need to get outside of and solicit feedback.
That's so true. I think there's so many, we kind of can become closed systems in our companies, and maybe we can tune out other voices. But I do think that, there's ideas, like you said, maybe it's within the company or outside. That could be the next great idea for somebody that's watching this. David, what about you? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot similar points here. I mean, from a actionable item, it's you're seeing it especially with this boycott going right now, where even just the messaging and how these brands are saying they're pulling out of their spends is not. You're really seeing the communication terribly with these brands, and it feels very virtue signaling with a lot of these brands, like, oh, you're just pulling your spend, or you're just going to move it to Q4, like. What are you doing? And then you quietly see Vans shoes. Literally, they're pulling their spend and they're donating to areas of need during this crisis. And it's like, there's no advertising of that. They're just doing it. And it's like, interesting. Like, North Face and Patagonia were the first to do it. And it's like, first it was like, they're going to run ads on Instagram, but not Facebook. And it's like, well, it's owned by the same company. This feels tone deaf. And then it's like, okay, now we're going to pull back spend and run ads on other platforms. And they're like, oh, you're going to run the ads on, YouTube? Like that's any, And so I think what you're seeing in real time too is just watching brands. And I always encourage people, go on Twitter and follow every brand that you can think of and just create an email, a fake email, where you subscribe to every one of the brands that you like or don't like that's in your target market. Subscribe to their emails, follow them on social media, and just watch. The Facebook ad library is another great place to kind of monitor what other people in your space are doing, because every ad is there. You can monitor and basically spy on your competition and see what they're doing, and follow the North Star of whatever you product or service that you're selling. There's a North Star in all of it. Find that company, look at the messaging they're doing, and kind of like resonate with it and talk, how can we do something either different or similar, and kind of go that route. So
I think it's been very interesting, just to add, David, on what you were saying. We're also seeing brands donate their media, donating it to COVID, donating it to social issues, and actually giving their media to people to get their messages out, which I think is a really interesting twist in all of this. And then the second thing is listening. With social media, Listen to your customers. It's so important. You have two-way communication. It's not a one-way vehicle. And really early on, we had quite a few clients that were really spooked with what was happening and worried and concerned because their customers were giving them some very strong feedback that they weren't listening to. So it took a moment for them to step back and reorganize and actually use that. But it's one of the most powerful weapons you can have is to listen to your customers and listen to your stakeholders.
Now, if I may, let me throw out a question to Denise and David here, which is, it ties into some of what we've discussed. For better or for worse, I think it's for worse, but you know, we have a very divided society right now, particularly polarized, with strong opinions on both sides of the fence, be they socioeconomic opinions, be they racial opinions, be they etc. Religious opinions, whatever the case may be, for whatever reason, our society seems to be clearly polarized on a number of issues. And we discussed earlier how companies have tried to stay above the fray, kind of defensively, and say, we're not political, we're not, you know, this, that, and the other. How do they thread that needle? Because giant companies will have consumers across the spectrum. So how do they address things that may be divisive to their consumers, but clearly are important issues? How are you guys helping them navigate that process?
I'll go first just because I literally just dealt with this.
Okay.
We have a brand that we work with it's one of the original major D2C brands, and they, as of March, we were supposed to be in Walmart, Target. Like, we were finally going after a huge TV commercial spree. We were going national. They pulled, you know, we pulled back from it just because it was just like, we're gonna wait. But they're a company that's they're in New York, and everyone's there. And so there's been a lot of conversation around like how to deal with it. And I always say to them this, I just go, you know, what is your why? Like, you know, what's his name? The guy that does the why.
Simon Sinek.
Yeah. And it's a really good question. And you ask, are you doing this internally? Is this something that the brand is willing to stand for? And do they believe in it enough where they're willing to lose customers over it? Because you will. It is what it is. Like, this is the current culture we live in today. And I think that you're seeing, especially with, I mean, it's really the more on the political side, I feel like lately, a lot of the brands are taking stands for the first time. And I don't know if you saw RGA, you know, which is a very big ad agency, like, they gave their Twitter handle and said that they can do whatever they want with it. And so the team has literally taken it over, and just, it's all political now, because that's what the team internally wanted to be. They're like, we want to stand for something. And that's what they as a group wanted to stand for. And regardless of what it is, you just have to take that checklist and go, you need to be okay with losing some money here, because you will for the short term. That means it's not long term, but I think for the short term, you have to be okay with that. But understand, why are you doing this? That's the key.
And I'm going to say basically the same thing with a little bit different nomenclature, and that is that why is your purpose. A purpose, a good purpose, should be deeply aligned to your product or services. So it's the why you exist, why you're different in that category, what makes you unique, and what your promise is to both your employees and your customers alike. And I think that if you stay true to that purpose and use that as a lens by which to view everything, you're going to lose customers. Everyone doesn't love what Patagonia does. They're a very famous purpose-led brand. They're a B Corp, that is their charter and mission. But I will tell you that the new trends that are emerging are saying that customers that do believe in your why and your purpose are willing to pay up to a 25% premium to support you, to vote with their dollars to say, I believe in what you're doing. So our counsel and recommendations to the brands we're working with starts with purpose, getting very granular and deep about actuating that purpose, not having some beautiful slogan when you walk into the lobby, but something that each individual that works for your organization can tell you how it manifests in the job they do. How is that purpose meaningful and actuated? How are you bringing value based on that purpose? So if you have a hospital, you probably don't want your purpose to be to plant trees. It's got this lack of alignment. So you need to find something that is deeply in alignment with the service or product that you provide. And then this purpose is the lens by which you make decisions. If it leads you in a political place, so be it. You will actually lose customers, but you will gain a lot of respect and lifetime values from the customers that resonate with your purpose. So it's sort of one of those things where you give something up, but you get something a bit stronger in return.
And I will say, you know, I'm certainly, despite my youthful appearance, I'm not a millennial. I've been a Patagonia fan for years, and that's just because I like their gear. They made quality gear that stood up to time, etc. But, you know, since they've always kind of been a purpose-driven company, but since their movement to B Corporation status and their messaging and their catalogs, etc., it's an added bonus for me buying Patagonia and knowing at the same time that they're also, I can feel good about buying from them. So I do think that resonates with consumers.
And that's, money can't buy that.
Yeah.
You know, that feeling good. Like, it is funny. You can't talk to anybody with Patagonia without bringing up the issue that they align with.
Yeah.
Because you're aligning with them. Whether you like it or not, when you put that Patagonia on, that's what it is, you know, and that there is something to say about that. So.
And purpose is very much about empowerment. So one of the things that you'll find in Patagonia, having done some research with them, is that each one of their employees brings their personal purpose to work and aligns it with the corporate purpose. And that is where you have like explosive actions occur. So they've really empowered their employees. They really have given them a lot of latitude to bring their passion and their purpose to work to align it with the greater corporate purpose.
Awesome.
And also being open to that at all levels of the organization, right? I mean, everybody goes into work with a purpose, but not everybody feels that, you know, that purpose is welcome in the organization as a whole. So making it welcome really, I think, turbocharges the ability of the organization to.
Yeah, you have to create feedback loops for every level, because the best ideas could be in the least obvious places.
Yeah.
You have to create reward systems. I mean, it's something that you have to put a lot of diligence and effort towards for it to be successful. But those listening skills, they're everything.
I have told, this is kind of one of my pointers that I always talk to about for management, particularly at smaller companies or middle market companies, where they're thinking, okay, how can we expand? How can we do, you know, what products can we introduce, et cetera? I'm like, ask your people, ask everybody in your organization, encourage them to come with you, to you with ideas, because you will get some great ideas out there. You know, you may think, oh, you know, we're in management and these are our line manufacturing people. Well, guess what? Those folks are looking at your products every day and thinking, I wonder if you did this. But if you don't empower them to speak that, you're missing out on some great ideas, great improvements, great cost savings.
Innovation, that's one of the hallmarks. And that's where I think a lot of diversity comes into play, is that diversity of thought, diversity of backgrounds, that's where great innovation is usually born.
Yeah.
This is also, I want to let the panel continue, because this is the gold part of the panel where we just have this discussion. But for those of you that are in the audience, the Q&A panel is open. So go ahead and feel free to ask questions. But I want to let the panelists continue. There is one question that it looked like we already answered, so I'll let that one go. But any of you, but please continue the discussion. I want to let that keep going, and then I'll wait for some more questions to come in. And I have one right here. Is I guess how do you message once we get out of crisis now? Now, once, let's say we get out of COVID, we get out of things, does messaging need to change?
Yes.
Or do we still continue? What is that going to be?
Well, messaging constantly has to change. And I think, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but I think Denise and David will speak to that as well. But messaging, whether it's in crisis or non-crisis, is always evolving, I think. You can never get complacent about it.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's from we had this, well, it was now like mid-May, right? We were kind of like coming out of COVID in a way, right? Thought we were. And I went to everybody and said, okay, we need to have messaging that delights and inspires people, because people are wanting to go out. They're wanting to do things. And so a lot of our messaging was literally that, like that shoe company, like I said, like I shot the content again, and I literally showed us walking outside and saying like, change the messaging. And, with another one of our brands we worked with, like it was all about, getting it shipped to you in bulk. And then it was like, you don't need to get it in bulk anymore. Like it's, and just, it was interesting because you saw the COVID sort of messaging that literally every brand released. It was in these unprecedented times, and these, and like you literally could just Google that word, and it was every corporate email, and it was just so like, I get it. We're in unprecedented times. Like we all understand this, but you saw every ad, everybody, and then you watched the TV, and it was like every commercial, it was corporate jargon, and you're like, everybody's already understands that. Like we're stuck at home. Like we get it. Tell me what I need to know, or like, so we switched it up, and we instantly saw lifts across the board when we were showing like people being outside with the products, people going on vacations with the products. And it was like, just telling them their future focus, not their current moment. Because at the end of the day, marketing, especially for what we do, is always telling them what happens when they have the product. So it's that value of what you get and that feeling what you get. And that's how we show it in marketing. And, the joys of, definitely social media is you can just like test 20 different messaging and be like, that 3 didn't work, but that one did, and go from there. And, we were even testing at one point, we were testing landing pages that were like going to pages where we wouldn't list anything for sale on product pages, just to see like, hey, maybe people don't want to buy anything. Maybe they just want to browse. And now that's where we've shifted, because now we're going into what we think could be a long-term recession. And we're like, okay, how do we navigate this market when people really are just window shopping, and what's going to happen next? And just kind of like, we're managing everything. We threw all of our KPIs out the window for the year. We're like, we have no clue what to expect. Like nobody does. And we just have to be okay with that. So
we're building platforms against all of our ideas. So if we look at the notion of something like diversity and inclusion, okay, what does that look like now in the heat of the moment? What does that look like 2 months from now? What does that look like 2 years from now? And how are we extending this platform? The same for purpose. What does this look like in the crisis as we emerge from the crisis? And once we get back to whatever version of normal or new normal that we're creating, so they're not one-offs. I think one of the dangerous things brands can do is to create one-offs. It's like, this is the stand we take for this, and now it's gone. And here's a new stance we're taking, and now it's gone. So we've been really counseling our clients to think through the entire continuum of thought of what that might look like today, tomorrow, a year from now, 5 years from now, knowing that they have to have this flexibility and change. We did a lot of COVID thinking, but when we had the social unrest explode, that changed and impacted a lot of that thinking. So there was a flexibility and a nuance that need to be incorporated, but those platforms remain the same.
That's brilliant. Actually, one question that just came in, Denise, maybe I'll direct to you, is if you're in a small business and you need employees, what are some steps you can take from a core values or marketing standpoint to bring in employees or attract employees, given your research and what you said?
This notion of sharing what you stand for and what you stand up for. It's something very attractive, especially to our younger generations. They resonate with it completely. And now that we've got dense research that says they're putting alignment with that value and they're putting alignment with that purpose literally well over salary. Salary is like fifth. So in order to attract that top talent, you have to be consistent, you have to communicate readily, and it has to be an organized way in which you're presenting this. If you're going to lead through that lens, it cannot be on just one touch point. It has to be on every touch point, and not as a mechanical effort, but again, as this lens to view everything through that purpose and for your reason for being. And the way David said it, your why. Why are you here? Why do you exist?
Yeah, I like how it's what I'm hearing is this something that's really deep into the fabric of the institution, not just a superficial one-off response, which seems relevant. And then I guess there was one question I want to come back to, David, for you. We had someone in the audience who's have a question about event-specific marketing. So this could even be like a one-off conversation, but this is relevant, I guess. Do platforms lend themselves to certain types of businesses? So like this individual is in the event industry, 27 to 40-year-old. Do you look at platforms for different industries, in particular that one? Do you have any thoughts?
I mean, event marketing in and of itself, you just have, is it B2B or is it like a B2B focused? Be on LinkedIn. I mean, LinkedIn InMail is one of the best, most targeted places to be for B2B. If it's, we do events, we'll do concerts, for example. Facebook and Instagram will always be the number one, but Snapchat in terms of the data has the best data, because you can literally Snapchat keeps the location targeting of where you go and instantly goes, okay, this person's lumped into this. So really, yes, it does. But honestly, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn are going to be your top three choices, either B2B or going after like the general public.
Excellent. Well, I wanna just thank each one of you individually. I mean, I was telling people this before. When you put together a panel, you want to go for the top, and so that's what I did, and we got the top. And so, what's going to happen is that after this broadcast, there'll be a recording sent to those of you that watched, and I'll also give some contact information to our panelists if you want to reach out to them directly. So if you want to reach out to David at Herman Digital, or you want to reach out to Denise at her company at TWH. If you want to reach out to Constantine at Fogel & Putzmianos, you'll be able to talk to them directly. So I just want to thank each one of you. I think this has been a fantastic discussion and a conversation. I took certainly a lot of notes, so I have a lot of brainstorming to do myself after this. So thank each one of you. Thank all of you for tuning in. We'll have another webinar coming up to you next month. And so thank you so much, and have a great and safe Independence Day weekend.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.